stand against domestic abuse. The Blackburn Center's Ann Emmerling and Dr. Sheila Confer are here to talk about how they fight for victims. Ann and Dr. Sheila, thank you so much for coming. Welcome to Real Life.
Thank you for having us. We really appreciate the opportunity. Yeah.
Well, maybe you can start off with, what is the Blackburn Center?
Blackburn Center is the agency that's here in Westmoreland County in western Pennsylvania to provide services to people whose lives have been impacted by violence. We started as a rape crisis hotline many years ago. We're more than 40 years old, and quickly expanded to include victims of domestic violence. Recently expanded our mission again to include victims of any kind of crime. So we're there in the aftermath of that kind of trauma. We're the experts in this area to provide trauma-informed services for people whose lives have been impacted by violence. And then the other part of our mission is to say, but wouldn't it be nice if this didn't happen in the first place?
Right.
So we really want to be out in the community and doing whatever we can to engage the community in good conversation about why does this happen in the first place? And what do we need to say differently to little boys when they're growing up? And to help people just to be engaged differently in how we can talk about ending the violence.
Well, is it really, I'm wondering, like, what people are maybe watching saying, is there really violence in this area?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. This is no different than any other place in the country or in the world. So the statistics are pretty staggering. When you think the rate of domestic violence is 1 in 4 women are going to be impacted by domestic violence at some point in their lives. And it isn't only women who are impacted by domestic violence, but that's certainly the majority of people who are sexual assault. A person is sexually assaulted at some point at every 2 minutes in this country. So there's the impact of this. Little children are impacted all the time, and it's not just younger adults, it's older adults, it's senior citizens who have had this kind of thing happen to them in their lives, and so we need to be there to be providing that supportive response.
Well, how did you guys get involved with this cause?
I don't know. Ann's been involved a lot longer than I have. It's just something that has always sort of, I don't have any personal experience, thankfully, with domestic or sexual violence, but it's just always been an issue I felt really strongly and passionately about. And about 5 years ago, when I was asked to join one of the committees, the Social Transformation Committee, which focuses on this sort of community messaging and how can we make it so that this stops happening. When I was asked to join that committee, I jumped in, I think, with both feet and hands, and
absolutely,
and I haven't looked
full
back.
engagement, which has been great, which has been wonderful.
I just wanted to take off on Ann's point about the how prevalent it is, and I think a lot of times it's not until it touches us personally that we realize that. And so, for example, I work for the University of Pittsburgh at Greensburg, and in October, one of our former students was killed, allegedly by her ex-boyfriend, and our campus community was just shattered. And this year, for Walk a Mile in Her Shoes, which we'll be talking about in a minute, we have the largest team ever since we've started participating, and it's because, very unfortunately, our community was touched by the violence.
Is it predominantly ladies and women that are being abused by men?
Yes. That's, if you look at statistics, that's definitely the majority. But to say that it doesn't only happen that way, so we want to make sure that anybody who needs services understands that services are available regardless of gender, regardless of age. But what we also want to be clear about is we have to understand why it happens. So that's why we get more specific in talking about engaging men and figuring out what we need to do differently.
Well, so I was going to ask you that, Ann. Is it relationship extended out of violence out of a relationship, or is it random?
It's a lot of, with domestic violence, clearly it's relationship based, so that would be something that's going on. There's a power and control issue within a relationship that gets out of hand, and that there needs to be some kind of response to that in some way to make somebody safer in that relationship or to be able to leave that relationship. So the randomness, maybe people think more about with sexual assault, but the reality is the majority of times somebody is sexually assaulted, it's by somebody that they know.
Is that
really?
Right. So there is the person kind of stranger in the alley. Not that doesn't happen, but that's really not the majority of times. It's going to be somebody that is known to that person. It may be a dating situation. It may be an acquaintance. It may be somebody that they work with. So the person that they're, maybe somebody that they've just met that evening at a party, but there's something that's a little more targeted about it than it being so random.
Do you find that once a lady is abused, violently abused, that they stay in that relationship and it continues?
Sometimes, and that's some of the question that we get a lot is, why does somebody stay in an abusive relationship? And what we're trying to do is to shift the question and say, let's talk about why it happens in the first place, to really get to the bottom of that, because what we know is it's so hard for somebody to leave an abusive relationship sometimes. I mean, and we're not talking about something that happened once and I say that's never going to happen to me again. It's much more coercive. It's much more kind of a long-term build-up of something. Right. So it may happen in the beginning of a dating relationship where somebody's a little more controlling, somebody's jealous, but then it escalates. And then, so somebody's been doing this for years. You know, we really socialize girls to think that they can be the fixers for things, that they can make things work, that they can make things better. And so they want to, hope springs eternal. So it's that sense of, I'm just going to keep at this. And if I can't make this work, there's something wrong with me. So
I also know, my other question is, along with Dawn's, is there seems to be a shame factor in all of this.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely.
I have a memory. I just met this woman. We were at a college orientation, and she shared with me how she had been raped when she was at a college fraternity party 20 years before and never told anybody. Right. You know, and I thought there was so much shame associated. Absolutely. And is that something you find as well with the women?
Still less now, but absolutely still. So we know when somebody steps forward and says, I've been a victim, we can't guarantee what the response is going to be. And we can't guarantee that there's not going to be a negative response for them. So we always make it absolutely somebody's choice to do that, to take that step. But it isn't. And let me just cycle back around to what Sheila said. The other thing about somebody leaving a domestic violence situation is the young woman that Sheila talked about had left the situation. It was an ex-boyfriend. And so what we know is lethality is something that's so important. I never want to make a decision for somebody about how lethal that relationship may be, and what the end result could be of that. So,
how often is drugs and alcohol associated with these kinds of events? So
what I would say, it's not causative. It's not something that, boy, if somebody just weren't drinking or weren't doing drugs, that they wouldn't be doing this. I mean, if that were the case, that would be a kind of a solution we could go after a little differently. They may exacerbate, they may make things a little worse, but it's not that it is something that is the root cause.
Well, you're having something coming up this Saturday.
We are.
Can you share with our family what
I've been doing a lot of talking. Sheila.
Okay. Yeah.
Come on, Sheila.
Sheila will get to chime in.
Thank you. So this Saturday is our 8th annual Walk a Mile in Her Shoes event. Walk a Mile in Her Shoes is a national event that's held all over the country, and so it's an opportunity for men to come out and walk a mile in high heel shoes.
And we have a pair for you.
Yay! Awesome. I wondered how you did that, because Dawn's feet are a little bigger than mine.
We have men's sizes. We buy them from a company in California. We order them special.
How high are the heels?
We have different.
I think we have.
So they're not those big 6 inch ones.
No. But we have a shorter heel too.
That's all.
And it's important. I think it's important that to make everyone aware that we don't expect the men to walk in high heels if that's not something that they feel they can physically do or emotionally. So there's a lot of people who don't walk in heels. Of course, there are a lot of women who walk as well.
All the time. Well, when's the event?
This Saturday, April 21st. Registration begins at 9 a.m. and the walk starts at 10 a.m.
Whereabouts?
It is at Offutt Field in Greensburg.
Offutt
Field. It's the stadium for Greensburg Salem High School.
So you walk around the stadium.
We're going to walk.
Well, that's halfway good. So
it's contained.
You can go to our website, ctvn.org, and we'll put a link to their site. So if you would like to come out and participate, I'm perfectly considering this.
I'd hope that'd be great.
It's a powerful experience. It's a lot of fun, but it's a really powerful experience because people really get that opportunity to say, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. I'm going to put the shoes on my feet and try to understand what women are experiencing.
One of my colleagues to come and go with me. I need that moral support.
That's right.
So anyway,
please do. You can hold each other up.
Yep.
Literally.
Absolutely.
We absolutely see that happen.
Well, thank you for all the work you're doing.
Absolutely.
We need more people standing up for what is right and good.
Well, we appreciate this opportunity to come out and talk.
And I'm glad you guys are on. Maybe we can have you back. We can talk more in depth about some of these issues and the heart of the issue, because we never got to go to why they happen.
We'd love to do that. Please, we'd love to come back.
What you can do to help people. Nobody wants to be an abuser. Unless there's something wrong with them.
Well, and that's one of the things we're talking about is how can we change the expectations for men and the whole kind of pressure on masculinity and begin to have that. That's a really important conversation.
Well, we'll have you back to have that conversation and try to help people. You know, our goal is to try to give real answers for real life, and this is a real life situation, and we want to make sure that we face those real life situations with wisdom and with God's word.